Have you ever felt that fear doesn't paralyze you? It convinces you that stopping is the right thing to do. It doesn't come as a monster. It approaches you as advice, disguised as prudence. It dresses up as logic and whispers in your ear that maybe it's better to wait a little longer, that it's not the right time, that you need more certainty, more security, more time. And then, without realizing it, fear becomes your guide. And there's no prison more effective than the one that seems to have been built by yourself. Fear is not a weakness. It's not a character flaw, nor an emotional defect. Fear is a program, an inherited vibration, a pattern engraved in the body, in the mind, in the energy field. It is born from memories, some of yours, others from generations that came before. It is activated by experiences, by absences, by broken promises. According to Napoleon Hill, all fear carries within itself the same core, the fear of loss of security, of approval, of love, of freedom, of self-worth. And behind all these losses, the same emptiness, the fear of no longer being who you were, and of not yet knowing who you can be. The mind, when dominated by fear, creates perfect justifications, rational, intelligent, and dangerously convincing. You call it responsibility, you call it care, you call it strategy. But inside, what is acting is the fear of not being able to cope, of being judged, of not being enough. Tony Robbins said that fear is just the anticipation of pain, and what you expect, you live. The pain, many times, is not in what happened. It is in what you believe can happen. This video is an invitation, not to eliminate fear because that would be denying a sacred part of your humanity, but to see it, understand it, and go through it with awareness. It is a call to expose what is hidden, to tear apart the vibrational veils that distort your perception, to transform fear into direction, into a compass, into alchemical fire. Over the next few hours, we will walk through internal territories where fear hides, where it repeats itself, where it prevents you from expanding. You will not find magic formulas here. You will find deep truths, forgotten maps, mirrors of the soul. If, at any point in this journey, you feel that something inside you has been touched, that a small piece has turned, write in the comments, "I am crossing fear with sacred courage," because declaring this, even in silence, is an act of vibrational rupture. It is the beginning of reconstruction. Fear is not the end. It is the beginning of a new version of you that is ready to be born, and all it needs is for you to decide to continue, even if you tremble. The invisible prison, when fear seems logical. Fear does not scream, it infiltrates. It settles in slowly, like a fog that covers the road until you forget that there was once a clear path ahead of you. And it is precisely in this silence that it becomes most dangerous. Because when fear appears with the face of panic, you recognize it. But when it disguises itself as logic, you listen to it. When it speaks as responsibility, you embrace it. When it dresses itself as prudence, you obey it. And so, fear doesn't stop you. It convinces you. How many times have you postponed an important step, telling yourself that it wasn't the right time yet, that you needed to think more, study more, plan better? How many times have you believed you were being rational when in fact, you were just trying to protect yourself from possible pain? Fear has learned to speak the language of maturity. It has learned to hide behind phrases like, "I can't take risks now," or "I need to be sure before I act." And with that, it has gained power, not because of what it is, but because of how it sounds. And the most subtle thing is that this prison has no bars. It has justifications, and you build them so carefully that you don't even realize you're locking yourself inside. You believe you are being responsible, but you are just trying to avoid the discomfort of failing, of putting yourself out there, of not being accepted. Fear becomes an inverted compass. It always points away from your expansion, and you call this common sense. But common sense, when guided by old pains, turns into silent sabotage. Fear, disguised as reason, paralyzes you more than the unknown itself, because it holds you back before you even try. It convinces your mind that it is better to stay where you are. And when fear becomes an argument, it takes a lot of presence to discern, is this really wisdom or is it an escape? It is not easy to tell the difference, because fear speaks with the voice of the past. It uses your most painful experiences as proof. It recalls every failure, every rejection, every fall, not to warn you, but to stop you. It does not want you to take risks, even if the risk leads to freedom, because fear is not committed to your evolution. It is committed to your survival. But you were not born to survive. You were born to expand, to walk beyond the invisible fences that your mind created. And this only happens when you realize that the logic of fear is not your truth. It is just a story repeated so many times that it seems like yours, but it can be rewritten because you are the author of your journey, not the echo of your fears. The vibrational origin of fear, what your emotional frequency is telling you. Everything in the universe vibrates. Everything in you vibrates. And fear does too. It is not just a passing emotion or an uncomfortable thought. Fear is an energetic state, a specific frequency that emits signals to the field around you. And these signals, even when silent, become magnets. They attract situations, people, thoughts, and sensations that confirm and feed back that same vibrational pattern. When you remain in continuous states of fear, your electromagnetic field becomes incoherent. Your heart loses harmony with your brain. Your internal impulses become disordered, and the external world responds to this disorder. You begin to experience small repetitions of frustration, delays, blockages, inexplicable losses. Not because life wants to punish you, but because you are tuning into a specific channel, and you can only receive what is being transmitted on that frequency. The vibration of fear is dense, contracted, restless. It makes the body stiffen, the chest tighten, the breath shorten. It blocks intuition, disconnects presence, fragments clarity. And often, you don't even realize that you're vibrating at this frequency, because fear becomes your normal. It becomes the baseline state of your day. You wake up and already feel tense. You walk down the street and already expect the worst. You make decisions based on what could go wrong, not because you want to, but because your field has been trained to operate in protection mode. And this protection mode creates a paradox. It keeps you away from the very experiences that could dissolve fear. Because to change your vibration, you need to open up. And opening up seems dangerous to someone who has spent years trying not to get hurt. But the truth is that there is no healing in contraction. There is only healing in release, in surrender, in the conscious choice to breathe differently, think differently, vibrate differently. Fear is a message, not a verdict. It is telling you that there are parts of you operating in disharmony with what you want, that there are memories stored in your field asking to be released, that there is a frequency being sustained by habits, beliefs, internal narratives, and that you can reprogram. But to do so, you need to listen, feel, notice your body, feel your breath, observe your thoughts not as truths, but as clues, and then, little by little, start to remember your natural state is not fear, it is coherence, it is alignment, it is the trust that pulses beyond logic and calms before the response. The chemical addiction of anxiety, how your body learned to feel fear every day. There is an aspect of fear that few people realize. The body also becomes addicted to it, not out of malice, but through repetition. The brain, when identifying a threat, real or imagined, releases substances such as adrenaline, cortisol, and noradrenaline. These substances prepare the body to fight or flee. And when fear becomes constant, these chemical discharges also become constant. Over time, the body starts to function based on this pattern. It adapts. And what was once a temporary state of alert becomes a permanent mode of operation. It's as if the body is saying, "This is what I know. This is what I understand. This is what I know how to feel." And so, even when there is no danger, it keeps asking for the same kind of chemicals. Your heart races for no reason. Your mind races to predict catastrophes. Your chest tightens at the thought of simple choices. You feel like something is wrong, even when everything seems peaceful, because the body has not been taught to trust peace. It has been conditioned to expect the worst. Joe Dispenza explains that when the body gets used to fear hormones, it begins to act like the mind. It anticipates sensations, reinforces thoughts, and distorts perceptions to justify the chemical state it wants to maintain. And in this cycle, it is not just the mind that sustains fear, it is the entire body that feeds it. Even when consciousness wants to change, the organism resists, because unlearning fear requires more than positive thoughts. It requires bioemotional re-education. And this re-education begins with presence, with the decision to observe without judging what the body is feeling. It begins with pausing before reacting, with the internal gaze that asks, is this real now, or is it a reflection of what has already happened? Because anxiety is often a shadow of what was, an attempt by the body to prevent you from feeling the same pain again. But avoiding is not healing. Avoiding is just keeping the cycle going. The path to transformation involves teaching the body new chemicals, new sensations, new possibilities. And this happens little by little with practices that restore inner security, conscious breathing, gentle movement, restorative silence, declarations of truth that replace narratives of danger. Fear may have trained your body, but you can train your body to remember peace. Because peace also has a chemistry, and it is deeply healing. The fear of success, silent sabotage by those who have never felt worthy. At first glance, it seems contradictory. Why would anyone be afraid of winning? Why fear what so many desire? But the fear of success is not born of logic. It is born of identity, from the silent place within you that does not see itself capable of sustaining a good, full, fulfilled life. Because for those who have been conditioned to struggle, to extreme effort, to eternal waiting, receiving what is good can seem dangerous. Or worse, it can seem false. Success, for those who do not feel worthy, is an abyss, not because of what it demands, but because of what it reveals. It exposes old beliefs that say, I'm not enough, this isn't for me. At some point this will all fall apart. And for fear of experiencing this pain, the mind prefers not to even try. It prefers to silently sabotage its own steps, put it off until later, start and not finish, create invisible obstacles, call it destiny when it is merely a reflection of an unhealed self-image. The fear of success feeds on the idea that you don't have the internal structure to sustain what you want. It whispers that good things are fleeting, that joy has a price, that abundance is for others. And so, even when opportunities come, something inside you recoils. It hesitates. It shrinks. Not for lack of will, but for excess conditioning. It's like someone who has spent their life hungry, and when faced with a table full of food, doesn't know how to sit down. They feel guilty for having it. They feel afraid of losing it. They feel ashamed of wanting more. And it is in this emotional tangle that the fear of success hides. It doesn't want to stop you from growing. It wants to protect you from feeling exposed as you grow. It wants to avoid the discomfort of not recognizing yourself in your own evolution. But true success is not a performance. It is a natural reflection of who you are when you are aligned. It does not require inhuman effort. It demands presence, consistency, and a new pact with your dignity. It does not ask you to change who you are. It asks you to remember, to recognize that your brilliance does not diminish you, that achievement does not separate you from anyone, that the good life is not a threat. It is an extension of your truth. When it is lived with humility and gratitude, learned fear, how you inherited fears that are not even yours. There are fears that seem to be born with you, that have no name, no apparent cause, but inhabit your body as if they had always been there. Fears that arise in everyday situations with no rational explanation, as if the air itself became heavier at certain times. And it is at this point that the science of the soul meets the science of the body. Studies in emotional epigenetics show that unresolved traumas can be passed down from generation to generation, shaping the way we perceive the world, even without having directly experienced the events that gave rise to them. You carry stories that are not yours. Echoes of fears that your grandparents felt, emotional silences that your parents learned to maintain, automatic responses to dangers that may no longer exist, but that continue to vibrate in your field like a kind of invisible inheritance. And this inheritance shapes decisions, sabotages relationships, impedes steps, all without you realizing that you are responding to someone else's past. This learned fear does not come with a label. It manifests itself as resistance, as avoidance, as an "I don't know why, but I can't do it." And it is precisely because it does not have a conscious origin that it becomes more difficult to transform, because you try to rationalize the irrational. You try to solve with logic something that is vibrating in the unconscious, and then the cycle repeats itself. You blame yourself, judge yourself, compare yourself to those who seem to not have the same blocks. But it is not a lack of strength. It is just an old code asking to be reinterpreted. The first step is to recognize that not all fear is yours. And this, far from being an escape, is liberation. Because by identifying what was inherited, you begin to break cycles. You honor the stories that came before, without having to repeat them. You become a point of transformation in your lineage, in your field, in your consciousness. Inherited fear does not need to be your destiny. It can just be the starting point for building a life that respects the past, but chooses the present. Because the present is where you can finally breathe differently and teach your body, your mind, and your energy that it is safe to live without carrying what is not yours. The paradox of control. The more you try to control the future, the more fear controls you. The desire to control is often the most elegant response that fear has found to remain disguised. It does not appear as panic. It emerges as excessive planning, as a need for reassurance, as an obsession with details. But behind every attempt at control, there is a deeper restlessness. The inability to trust in the invisible, in the flow, in divine timing. And that is exactly where the paradox reveals itself. The more you try to control, the more insecure you feel. This continuous attempt to dominate what has not yet happened arises from the anxiety of the ego, from the part of you that believes that you will only be safe if you know exactly what will happen. But the future does not respond to rigidity. It responds to presence. And when you disconnect from the now in order to try to guarantee the future, you lose access to the only real creative force, your present energy. Control is a sophisticated illusion. It promises stability, but delivers tension. It says it will protect you, but it imprisons you in scenarios that don't even exist yet. And so you start living in constant vigilance mode, thinking about all the possibilities, trying to anticipate every risk, exhausting your mind with a job that isn't its job, predicting the uncontrollable. And in the end, instead of avoiding fear, you amplify it. Because fear doesn't grow with the unknown. It grows with resistance to the unknown. It feeds on the attempt to avoid the unexpected. And when you try to control what is beyond your reach, you disconnect from the only intelligence that knows the way, intuition, that silent voice that doesn't need to predict, because it feels. It doesn't need to guarantee, because it trusts. Trusting isn't giving up, it's giving space. It's allowing life to surprise you. It's walking with intention, but with lightness. It's acting with focus, but with surrender. Because when you let go of control, something bigger can take over. And this greater something, consciousness, the field, the divine, has a vision that goes beyond your fear. It sees possibilities where you only see threat. It sees growth where you only see risk. And by aligning yourself with it, you don't lose power. You free yourself from the need to dominate everything and finally start living. Beware of fear disguised as goals. Not all goals are born from the soul. Some are born from absence, from the urgency to prove worth, from the silent desperation of trying to fill an internal void with external achievements. These are goals that seem grandiose, but carry behind them a dense, contracted, disconnected energy. And the most delicate thing is that this movement is usually celebrated. You are praised for being determined, visionary, tireless. But inside, what moves you is not inspiration. It is fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of not being important. Fear of not being remembered. And so the pursuit of goals turns into escape. You run, Not because you love the destination, but because you fear the silence of the present. And the more you run, the further you distance yourself from yourself, because there is a subtle and profoundly transformative difference between goals of the soul and goals of the ego. The goals of the soul expand. Those of the ego exhaust. The soul does not impose deadlines. It respects the timing of the seed. The ego, driven by fear, demands urgent harvests so as not to face the pain of waiting. And it is in this race that you can lose touch with your truth, because goals without alignment become self-imposed punishments. You wake up tired. You live for a future that never arrives. And when you finally achieve it, you feel the emptiness persist, because what your heart wanted was not that. It was to be seen, to be loved, to be recognized. And no trophy can satisfy this unhealed need. Fear, when disguised as ambition, makes you believe that more is always better, that you will only rest when you arrive, that you will only be happy when you achieve something. And this logic imprisons you, because it transforms life into an endless list of tasks that never touch your essence. The soul does not want to rush. It wants presence. It does not want to prove anything. It wants to remember who you are. That is why, before pursuing a goal, feel its vibration. Ask yourself, does this come from a truth or a lack? Does it expand me or tighten me? Does it connect me or separate me? Because real success is not a destination. It is a state, and it can only be sustained when it comes from peace, not from urgency, when it comes from self-love, not from the need to be validated. And this recognition, when it is internal, dissolves fear at its deepest root. Because fear only persists where there is still doubt about your value. The vibrational dissonance between desire and identity. There is an invisible space between what you want and what you believe yourself to be. This space is often what impedes the flow of manifestation. Because it's not enough to desire something, you have to be someone who sees themselves as worthy of experiencing it. When your desire vibrates at one frequency, but your identity vibrates at another, there is a silent friction, an energetic incoherence that impedes the natural movement of life. It's like trying to drive with the handbrake on. You accelerate, but you don't move forward. You can say 1,000 times that you want to prosper, love, achieve. But if on a deeper level, you still see yourself as someone small, limited, unworthy, reality will respond to this internal image. Because the universe doesn't just listen to your words. It listens to your vibration, and your vibration is shaped by what you believe about yourself, even if you don't realize it. Many times, fear isn't in what you want to achieve. It's in what you will have to leave behind to achieve it. Old roles, old narratives, old patterns of self-defense, and the mind, to protect itself from the unknown, prefers to maintain what is familiar, even if the familiar is pain, even if the familiar is scarcity. Because there is a psychic comfort in staying where you already know who you are, even if it means never living what you truly want. This vibrational dissonance is not a defect. It is a sign, an invitation to align what you want with who you choose to be, to rebuild your identity from the inside out, to declare, without fear, without doubt, without shame, that you do deserve to live a life in peace, a life with meaning. A life that reflects the greatness that your soul already knows, but that your mind still hesitates to believe. Alignment happens when you stop looking outside for what needs to be healed inside, when you realize that the greatest impediment is not in the circumstances, but in the image you carry of yourself. And that image can be reprogrammed. It can be rewritten with compassion, with presence, with truth, because you are not who fear says you are. You are who courage reveals when you allow yourself to remember. The fear of judgment, the prison of constant comparison. Few pains are as silent and, at the same time, as deep as the pain of feeling constantly evaluated, of living under an imaginary gaze that criticizes, compares, measures, and condemns. The fear of judgment is not born solely of insecurity. It is born from the wound of not having been accepted as you were, of having had to adapt to fit in, of having learned that showing too much is dangerous, that shining can generate rejection, that being yourself can cost love. And so you learn to calibrate your expression, to contain your spontaneity, to measure each word, each step, each choice, based on what others will think. And little by little, the world stops being a space of experience and becomes a stage where you act, where you represent, where you try to be what they think is beautiful, right, safe. But inside, something breaks. Because every time you mold yourself to be accepted, you distance yourself from yourself. Constant comparison arises in this same field. You begin to measure your worth by what you see outside, by the achievements of others, by the other person's appearance, by the other person's voice. And this traps you in a cycle of emotional scarcity, where it never seems like enough, because there will always be someone with more, or with something different, or with something that triggers in you the feeling that you are behind. But this feeling is a reflex, not a truth. External judgment only hurts when it finds an unresolved doubt within you, when it touches on a point that you yourself have not yet integrated. And so, healing the fear of judgment is, above all, healing self-judgment. It is looking within with less harshness, with more compassion, with more wholeness. Because when you accept yourself, the other person's gaze loses power, not because it disappears, but because it no longer finds a place to focus. Freeing yourself from the fear of judgment means returning to your center. It means remembering that you did not come into this world to be a copy of anyone else, that your frequency is unique, that your truth does not need to be defended, it just needs to be lived, and that the more you align with who you really are, the less noise the outside world makes. Because the sound of authenticity, even in silence, is always louder than the noise of comparison. Why fear thrives in emotional silence? Fear feeds on what is not said, on what is swallowed, stifled, swept under the emotional rug. It grows in silence, not in shouting. It grows in the absence of a name, in the lack of expression, in the attempt to move forward without looking back. Because every ignored emotion turns into a shadow. And every ignored shadow becomes a fertile field for fear to flourish. From a very early age, many of us learn not to bother, not to demonstrate, not to cry too much, not to question too much. We were taught to smile, to maintain harmony, to swallow pain, to preserve the environment, to pretend to be strong when what we wanted most was a hug. And so we distanced ourselves from our emotional truth, not by choice, but for survival. But emotions do not disappear. They move. When they are not felt consciously, they accumulate in invisible places in the body, mind, and vibration, and fear finds its home in them. It lodges itself in forgotten memories, in poorly healed wounds, in voids that no one noticed. And then, in moments of challenge, it returns, not as something new, but as a reverberation of what was never welcomed. Emotional silence is what allows fear to speak louder. Because without expression, you lose your own reference. You begin to doubt your intuition. You begin to distance yourself from your sensitivity. You begin to protect yourself not only from others, but also from yourself. And in this disconnection, fear sets in, not because it is stronger, but because it finds no resistance. Talking about what you feel is not weakness. It is sovereignty. Naming fear is the first step to diminishing its power. Bringing to light what is hidden is rescuing the parts of you that have been frozen in time. When you allow yourself to feel truthfully, something begins to dissolve. And what seemed to be an insurmountable monster reveals itself as nothing more than an old emotion that needed to be heard. Fear thrives in silence, but it begins to disappear the moment you decide to be whole. And being whole is this: giving voice to what was silent, making space for what was repressed, and remembering that no emotion is dangerous when it is welcomed with awareness, because awareness heals, and healing always brings freedom. Mapping subconscious fear. Not all fear is conscious. Many live hidden in the deepest layers of the mind, operating silently, influencing choices, sabotaging paths, shaping reactions. These fears do not have a defined form. They manifest themselves as subtle discomforts, as repeating patterns, as obstacles that arise just when you are about to change. And because they are in the subconscious, they cannot be faced with effort. They can only be revealed with presence. The subconscious is like a large field of emotional records. It stores everything that has not been resolved, everything that was felt intensely but could not be processed at the time. It does not judge, does not filter, does not forget. It just repeats. And when a fear settles there, it begins to influence your vibration automatically. You start to react without knowing why, to avoid without realizing it, to miss opportunities for reasons that rationally do not make sense. Mapping these fears requires delicacy. It is not a mental act. It is a sensory dive, a process that begins when you allow yourself to pause, breathe consciously, feel your body as it is. Observe your thoughts as if they were clouds, without getting attached to any of them. And then ask honestly, what inside me is trying to protect me? What am I trying to avoid feeling? What part of me still believes it's safer to retreat? This type of active listening is not immediate, but it reveals it. Because fear, no matter how hidden it is, has a signature. It manifests itself in muscle contraction, in chest restlessness, in the urge to change the subject, in the resistance to staying present. And when you begin to notice these reactions with kindness, you also begin to decode them. You begin to realize that behind every fear there is a story, and behind every story, a part of you that is still waiting to be freed. The rational mind can try to explain, justify, or even deny, but the body knows, the body feels, and the body speaks. When you listen to it carefully, it shows you where there are still unintegrated vibrational fragments. Fragments that do not need to be fought, but rather welcomed. Mapping fear is not a process of hunting. It is a process of reconnection, of looking within and saying, firmly and gently, I am here, and now we can get through this together. Why eliminating fear is a mistake. The idea that we need to eliminate fear in order to be free is a dangerous illusion. It assumes that fear is an enemy, an anomaly, a flaw in the soul system. But fear is actually part of the intelligence of life. It does not appear by chance. It has a function. It reveals. It protects. It warns. The problem is not feeling fear. It is allowing fear to lead, command, determine. When you try to eliminate fear without understanding it, you run the risk of simply repressing it. And everything that is repressed returns with more force. Fear does not disappear because you ignore it. It disappears because you listen to it, because you understand it, because you integrate it. And integrating is not allowing it to control. It is recognizing its origin, accepting its message, and then, from consciousness, deciding with sovereignty the next step. Fear is often the last layer before courage, the final resistance before a new level of expansion. And instead of trying to eliminate it, you can use it as a compass. Where there is fear, there is a part of your soul trying to cross a threshold. There is an invitation to grow, to choose differently, to break with the old. Fear marks the exact point where you can transform. It points to the directions where you still believe you are not capable, that you are not worthy, that you are not ready. And that is precisely where the portal resides. Because the crossing is only true when there is vulnerability. And vulnerability is not weakness. It is spiritual maturity. It is the courage to be whole, even in the face of uncertainty. When you stop fighting fear, something in you realigns. You stop wasting energy trying to protect yourself and start using it to expand. You exchange the internal war for a dialogue. And this dialogue transforms, because the part of you that feels fear does not want to be ignored. It wants to be heard. It wants to be guided. It wants to trust that there is something greater in control, and that something greater is you in a state of presence. You do not need to kill fear. You need to mature your relationship with it. And this maturation is what makes room for true freedom. The kind that comes from the encounter with all of its parts, including those that still tremble, because it is in trembling that the soul moves. It is in discomfort that the truth reveals itself. It is in acceptance that fear loses the need to scream, because finally it has been understood. The metaphor of the broken bridge. All fear is a crossing that did not happen. It is a broken bridge between who you are now and who you can become. And no matter how much the mind tries to find parallel paths, safer shortcuts, less uncomfortable detours. The truth is that some transformations require crossing exactly that point where everything seems unstable. Because there is no cure outside the path of the soul, and the soul always points in the direction of growth, even when the ground seems fragile. The broken bridge is the perfect symbol of this inner place where fear lives. It is the space between the known and the possible, between the old and the new, between the conditioned self and the awakened self. Looking at this bridge awakens discomfort. You see the flaws, the holes, the loose parts, and everything inside you says, hold on, reinforce, fix. But there are times when the fixing happens as you walk. Structure reveals itself in action. Strength is born of movement. And there is no way to know this until you take the first step. Staying on the sidelines may seem safer, but standing still in front of the bridge is also a choice. And this choice has a cost. The cost of not experiencing something that could have healed, revealed, freed. Fear paralyzes with promises of protection, but this protection is often a prison because it prevents you from seeing who you can be when you cross. And crossing, in this context, is not about overcoming fear. It is simply about moving forward, even with it. Every broken bridge is an invitation from life to restore trust. Trust in your ability to withstand vulnerability. Trust in the time that heals. Trust in the invisible hand that sustains you when you choose with your heart. Because it is not fear that destroys the bridge. It is the constant escape that prevents reconstruction. There are bridges that only reveal themselves to those who walk. There are truths that can only be accessed when you accept the risk of not having all the guarantees. And there are parts of you that only awaken when you step, even trembling, on what still seems uncertain. The bridge was never there to test you. It is there to transform you. And it is by going through it, not by going around it, that you become whole. How dopamine may be sabotaging your courage. We live in a time when everything demands a quick reward, a click, a notification, a like. Each instant stimulus releases a small dose of dopamine in the brain, the neurotransmitter of pleasure, motivation, and the expectation of reward. And little by little, without realizing it, we become dependent on these peaks, dependent on immediate gratification, on the feeling that something new, something stimulating, something rewarding is always coming. But the problem is not with dopamine itself, it is with the imbalance. When the dopaminergic system is overloaded with superficial and frequent rewards, it begins to lose sensitivity. What once brought motivation now demands more stimulation, more distraction, more directionless movement. And courage, which is built on silence, patience, and discomfort, begins to seem uninteresting, slow, difficult, because the brain has been trained to seek what is easy, fast, and immediate. Difficult decisions require presence. True courage requires inner silence. But addiction to digital dopamine fragments attention. It steals clarity. It prevents you from remaining with your own truth long enough to transform it. And fear, faced with this scenario, finds fertile ground. Because while you run away from the depths, it grows stronger on the surface. While you seek the next relief, it occupies the space of what has not been faced. Poorly managed dopamine sabotages courage because it convinces you that discomfort is a sign of error, that what requires waiting, effort, and constancy is not worth it. And then you start giving up before you even start, abandoning projects halfway through, trading deep journeys for shallow rewards. All of this without realizing that you're being guided by an internal system that was programmed to escape pain, but not to seek meaning. Rebuilding this relationship requires conscious choices, reducing artificial stimuli, recovering pleasure in simple things, teaching the body that it is not speed that heals, but depth, and that courage does not need to be heroic, it just needs to be constant, because it is in the repetition of presence, in staying with discomfort, in choosing to stay where others would give up, that true strength begins to reveal itself, not as an explosion, but as a root. And roots do not need to be rushed. They need solid ground, How a former soldier overcame the fear of civilian life by reprogramming his internal language. For years, he lived at war, not only in the trenches, but within himself. A former soldier, trained to act under pressure, accustomed to command, discipline, the logic of survival. But when the uniform was left behind and the routine of civilian life took over, something unexpected emerged. A deep fear, not of external danger, but of internal emptiness, of not knowing who he was anymore, of not knowing how to exist outside the battlefield, of not knowing how to reinvent himself without losing his own identity. The fear that was once physical became existential. He no longer fought against visible enemies. He fought against a constant feeling of inadequacy, as if there was no place for him in the world he once called home. Everything seemed strange. The silence bothered him. The slowness of ordinary life frustrated him. He asked himself day after day, "Who am I now?" And the more he tried to fit in, the more he lost himself, until in a moment of profound exhaustion, he realized that his pain was not in the world. It was in the language, in the words he repeated to himself. "I am no longer good enough. I don't know how to live like this. I am lost." These phrases, spoken in silence, created a vibration of failure even before any attempt was made. It was at that moment that the transformation began, not with a grand epiphany, but with a small adjustment, changing his internal discourse. He began to observe each thought as a command, as if he were still on duty, but now the mission was to reprogram his mind. He replaced denial with acceptance, stumbles with rehearsal, failures with learning. He began to say, "I am relearning. I am discovering new codes. I am creating a new way of serving." And with that, his vibration began to change. Not because the fear disappeared, but because he stopped feeding it with words that confirmed the worst. Internal language is the first territory of freedom. When you change the words you use to describe your reality, you begin to change the reality you live, because the mind believes what it repeats. And when repetition is conscious, it becomes reprogramming. He did not transform himself overnight, but with each rewritten thought, a part of him returned home, and that home was no longer the war. It was himself, at peace, under construction, in presence. The trap of "when I am ready," there is a waiting that paralyzes, a pause that is not a rest, but an escape, an illusion that presents itself as wisdom, but hides only fear. It is the idea that one must be completely ready to begin, that one must feel safe, confident, stable before taking the first step. But time reveals that this readiness often never arrives, because it is a fantasy constructed by the ego to avoid the discomfort of vulnerability. When I am more healed, when I have more time, when I know exactly how to do it. And so life passes, opportunities pass, connections pass, and you continue waiting for the ideal moment as if it were going to appear from outside. But the truth is that readiness is not a place that is reached. It is a state that is chosen, an internal decision to act even with doubt, to continue even with fear, to create even without certainty. Fear disguised as prudence creates sophisticated traps. It convinces you that you are being responsible, that you do not want to fail, that you are just waiting for the ideal conditions. But behind this speech, there is often an unnoticed insecurity, a part of you that still believes that you need to be perfect to deserve trying, that you need to be whole to start living. But living is what makes us whole. The soul doesn't wait for perfection. It waits for presence. It waits for you to show up to life, even if you're trembling, because it's in that surrender that strength begins to emerge. Not before, not after, but at the exact moment you say yes to what's calling you, even when you're afraid, even when you don't have a map, even when your heart is racing. Emotional readiness is built, not found. It's forged in small acts of courage, in uncomfortable choices, in steps that no one sees. And every time you act despite doubt, something inside you reorganizes itself. Fear loses ground. The soul gains space. And you finally realize that what you called "I'm not ready" was just the invitation you needed to start. The mistake of trying to kill fear. There's a mistaken, and quite common idea that fear needs to be destroyed, as if it were an enemy to be eliminated, a flaw to be corrected, an obstacle to be overcome with brute force. But fear is not a mistake. It is a messenger, and every messenger, when ignored or attacked, only screams louder. When you try to kill fear, you do not become stronger, you disconnect. Fear does not appear to stop you from living. It appears to show you where you still do not know yourself completely. It reveals the points that have been wounded, the traces of your history that still carry pain, the memories that have not been integrated. It is often an alarm, but the alarm is not the fire, and destroying it does not put out the fire. On the contrary, it leaves you blind to where it started. Trying to eliminate fear is denying a part of your humanity. It is declaring that it is only possible to grow in absolute peace, absolute trust, absolute clarity. But the soul grows even in doubt, even in imbalance, even in discomfort, because it is there, precisely there, that it learns to trust in the invisible, in what is not yet, but already pulsates as possible. True transformations doesn't happen when you become fearless. It happens when you become someone who knows how to listen to fear without obeying it, who can feel it without getting lost in it, who acknowledges its existence but chooses a different direction. Fear ceases to dominate when it is embraced, when it is seen, when it is respected for its function, and not extolled as truth. Killing fear is a never-ending battle, but transforming your relationship with it is a profound liberation. You stop living in war, and you start living in listening, in presence, in conscious choice. And this choice, made consistently, reconfigures your energy, redefines your narrative, restores your strength, because you did not come into the world to be invincible. You came to be whole, and wholeness includes fear, but is not guided by it. How imagination can free or imprison you. Everything you experience first begins in an invisible place, your imagination. It is there that the seeds of reality are planted. It is there that you rehearse, without realizing it, what will be possible or impossible in your life. Neville Goddard said, "What you imagine with emotion becomes your reality," and this phrase carries immense power, because it reveals that it is not logic that creates the inner world, it is feeling, and feeling, when combined with image, shapes what you begin to experience. Imagination can be a key to liberation or a subtle cell. It can open portals of expansion or reinforce the limits of fear, and it all depends on how you use it. When you imagine defeat, even unintentionally, you are training your body to react to failure. You are activating the same emotional circuits as loss. You are creating an internal reality that your energy field understands as true, and that, therefore, begins to attract more of the same. Many times, fear is not born of reality. It is born of a mental film, a future scenario that never happened, but that already causes anguish in the present. You imagine yourself being rejected, losing, being criticized, failing, and this continuous rehearsal, done with emotion, turns into belief. And belief, when not questioned, becomes destiny. But there is a different path. And that path begins when you choose to imagine with presence, when you realize that your mind can be an altar, not a battlefield, that it can be used to cultivate courage, beauty, peace. When you intentionally create images that support who you want to become, and feel with your whole body the vibration of already being this, of already being there, of already living with consciousness what has not yet materialized but already pulsates as real. Imagination aligned with the heart is a divine force. It does not ignore fear. It goes beyond it. It does not deny pain. It gives it new meaning. Because seeing yourself in an elevated state, even when everything seems dark, is a spiritual act, an act of faith, an act of creation. And it is in this act that life begins to reorganize itself around you, not because you have changed from the outside in, but because you have changed from the inside out. Fear and heart rate, the science of cardiac coherence to dissolve subtle panics. The heart is not just a vital organ, it is a center of intelligence, a field of subtle perception that captures, interprets, and responds to the environment long before the rational mind understands what is happening. And that is why, in moments of fear, the heart reacts. It accelerates, it contracts, it goes out of rhythm, because it is trying to protect, alert, and communicate. But this rhythm, when maintained in disharmony for long periods, turns into a pattern of anxiety, panic, and disconnection from the present. The science of cardiac coherence, studied in depth by the HeartMath Institute, reveals something extraordinary. When the heart enters a state of harmony with the brain, breathing, and emotions, it sends safety signals throughout the body. And these signals, in turn, regulate the nervous system, calm the mind, and restore presence. In other words, instead of waiting for fear to pass in order to calm down, you can directly access an inner technology that dissolves fear through vibrational alignment. The practice is simple but powerful. It does not require belief. It requires surrender, conscious breathing, focused on the heart region, accompanied by elevated feelings such as gratitude, compassion, or appreciation, has the power to restore internal coherence in just a few minutes. And this state is not just relaxation, it is reprogramming, because when the body learns to feel safe consistently, it begins to create new associations. You start to stop reacting with alarm to neutral situations. You start to build new bridges between feeling and acting. Fear is often a mismatch between what you experience and what you feel, between what your body wants to communicate and what your mind tries to control. But when you stop, breathe, and align yourself with your heart, something profound changes. Because the heart, when it becomes coherent, silences the noises of the mind. And in this silence, fear loses strength, because the body finally remembers what it is like to live without constant threat. It's not about ignoring what scares you, it's about creating an internal space where fear doesn't rule, where the frequency of peace can gradually become more familiar than that of alarm. And this familiarity heals, because it teaches the body that living doesn't have to be a struggle. It can be a flow, a rhythm, a return to the center where fear is not denied, but welcomed and gently dissolved. The practice of daily micro-courage. There is a romanticized idea about courage, as if it were a grand act, an impressive leap, an epic overcoming that changes everything at once. But the truth is much more silent. Real courage isn't revealed only in grand gestures. It lives in small movements, in the moments when no one is looking, in the decision not to give in to the old pattern, in the choice to stay present when everything invites you to escape. Micro-courage is that subtle strength that appears when you say yes to something new, even with a heavy heart, when you expose yourself a little more, when you speak the truth more calmly, when you choose internal honesty over external performance. These are small gestures, but energetically gigantic, because they go against automatic programming. They break with the repetition of fear. Each small decision, made with presence and intention, generates a new neural pathway, a new vibrational signature, a new internal testimony that it is possible to act, even with discomfort. And this accumulation of small acts, over time, changes everything. It changes how you see yourself. It changes what you tolerate. It changes the image you hold of yourself. Micro-courage does not require you to be confident. It only requires you to be committed to your truth, to your expansion, to the part of you that knows that living in congruence is worth more than pleasing fear. And with each gesture that honors this, fear diminishes. Not because it disappears, but because it loses control over your choices. The soul is strengthened by the conscious repetition of gestures that honor who you want to be. And there is no ritual more powerful than acting truthfully, even when your body trembles, because it is in this trembling that the soul moves. It is in this movement that the new begins. And when the new begins, even if small, something inside you whispers, "Now, yes, I am alive." And that is enough. Fear is one of the 6 invisible ghosts that Napoleon Hill describes as the greatest thieves of destiny, and perhaps the most silent of them, because fear does not break down the door. It settles in slowly. It whispers. It convinces. It waits. And when you realize it, you are already living below your truth, with restrained steps, with postponed dreams, with unspoken words, and an inner light that is slowly fading. But every time you act despite fear, something sacred happens. You rewrite your emotional biography. You show your body that it is possible to cross without breaking. You show your mind that it is possible to trust without controlling. You show your soul that it can, indeed, guide, even in uncertain territories. And each act of courage, even if small, is a new paragraph in this story of returning to who you really are. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Do that which you fear, and fear will die in the act." This phrase is not about brute force. It is about presence, about the ability to remain whole in the face of what scares you, about the faith that does not deny fears but rather transcends it. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to continue anyway, to listen to the deepest calling, even if the surface screams. May this video not motivate you. May it reconnect you with your dignity, with your strength, with the part of you that no longer wants to hide, that has already understood that fear is not the end. It is the beginning of reconstruction, and that is ready to act, not because everything is resolved, but because the soul is finally awakened. If this spoke to your essence, write in the comments, "I am going through fear with sacred courage." This phrase is more than a phrase. It is a vibrational affirmation. It is a vow to yourself. And every time someone writes it, the field of the person watching aligns as well, because that's how transformation happens. One awakened being at a time, until everyone remembers, fear doesn't define. It only reveals the portal that is ready to be crossed. And today, maybe you're ready.